Hello, everybody. We are waiting for a couple more people to log in, and we're going to give you some time to get settled, and we'll get underway. Okay. We're seeing people joining. All right. We're ready to go. Hello, everybody. We have over 550 guests from over 54 countries joining us today for our in-session talk, Expand, Stretching the Future by Design. Before introducing you to our esteemed guests, allow me to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link to the recording at some point next week after the event. We also invite you to ask questions by using the Q&A button. Please use the chat if you have any technical difficulties regarding the webinar. And today we aim to have a very interactive session, and we'll introduce polls during the talk. And you will be able to submit your answers online. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jeremy Myerson, Christian Bason, and Mariana Amatullo. I'm now going to hand over to Jeremy, who's going to start today's conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Joe, and hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Myerson. I'm Professor Emeritus in the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Design at the Royal College of Art. And I want to add my own warm welcome to everyone joining in session today, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. We've got people from 55 different countries joining us, which is incredible. Fantastic to have so many people signed up. And I think it's very much linked to the scale of interest is very much related to the topic under consideration. And that is nothing less than the future of design. Where does the design community go next in trying to tackle societal problems that are becoming more difficult and more complex the more we look at them? We know the principles of human-centered design and design thinking are well established, but do we need to go beyond them for the next wave of social innovation? And practitioners, educators, and researchers, and we know we've got lots of you on this call, how do you respond to challenges that are expanding in terms of speed, scale, and impact every day? So to help me explore some of these issues, I want to welcome two special international guests. Joining us from Copenhagen is Christian Bason, a political scientist and author and CEO of the Danish Design Centre. Christian's new book, co-authored with Jens Martin Skibsted, is called Expand, Stretching the Future by Design, and it really provides the hook for today's event. It's a fascinating read. We're going to be delving into the key messages and implications. And joining us also from New York is Mariana Amatullo, a leading academic and design strategist at Parsons School of Design. Mariana has enjoyed a long relationship with the RCA in an extensive career combining design research with social activism. So welcome to you both, Christian and Mariana. Before we get down to it, I just want to reiterate Joe's point that this is all about an exchange of views. I want to include everyone on this call, so let's make it as interactive as possible. Take part in our polls, make comments, ask questions via the chat function, and I'll do my best to weave in as much of your ideas and queries as possible. So let me start with you, Christian. How did a political scientist come to be running the Danish Design Centre? Give us a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, you might say I'm a kind of a recovering political scientist. I did choose at one point to supplement it with a PhD in design and leadership, just to get a few credentials in that space. But I'm coming from policy. I'm coming from social sciences. And it's really my interest in social sciences that drew me into first working as an evaluator in a consulting firm called Rambøll. Then I, after that career, shifted to running MindLab, which was the Danish government's innovation team. And I guess I got the job because I was very, very interested in innovation in government, and wrote some reports on that and got the job. And then I realized that design and designers have a crucial role to play in bringing the human perspective into innovation and into transformation, especially in social and public innovation. So that was my entry point into the whole design field about 15 years ago by now. And then I guess I had my credentials in order when I was then had the opportunity to become CEO of the Danish Design Centre.
All right, very, very interesting career path. Mariana, tell us a little bit about your role at Parsons and how you come to be at the new school.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you. To be here is fantastic. As we were conceiving the session with the team at RCA, the idea of coming together with Christian and this important book was evident to me, so I'm delighted to see it happen. In terms of my background at the new school, I've been at Parsons as a full-time professor in our School of Design Strategies now. I have the joy of working with incredible colleagues and students for the last almost 6 years. After many years on the West Coast of the United States, co-founding and leading the Design Matters program, the social innovation program. And that's where we first connected with Helen Hamlyn Centre, which was a beacon for me, early days. This is early 2000s of design for social innovation practices. These days at Parsons, I run the sort of academic vision for our online executive education programs and how we're thinking about expanding, no pun intended, design through many different audiences. And so I wear several hats at the new school and at Parsons.
So this idea of expanding the repertoire of design is very much on the Parsons agenda as well as the Danish Design Centre. Christian, tell us about how you came to write this book. What was the impulse? How did you get there? And what really is the big kind of overarching kind of message?
Right. Yeah. So I happen to have the book right here as well. Yeah. And the reason that we wrote it was basically that Jens Martin, my both good friend and relation, we started talking one day. And we came from very different perspectives, but both were active in World Economic Forum. He's an entrepreneur. He's a design philosopher. He's started and run a bicycle company called Biomega with beautiful and Scandi bicycle design and so on. So he's very much from the commercial space, entrepreneurship space. I came from the policy space, the political science space. You could say design for policy. And we got to talking about the need to challenge the current conception of design, that we are in a world where problems are expanding, where challenges are accelerating, and we both care so much about the design space. We felt that we needed to ask questions about how can design expand to keep abreast of the challenges, maybe at the forefront of challenges. And so we basically built the book around conversations between us around in which domains, which areas ought design then to expand to really enable the ongoing work of innovation, of change for a more sustainable world.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed reading the book, and in a sense, you're moving design away from what you call toasters and posters, physical objects and graphical communication, to a much more deep and reflective engagement with societal challenges. And I also liked, you quoted one of my favorite designers, Charles Eames, when he was asked to define the boundaries of design. He said, well, what are the boundaries of problems? And I thought that this idea of expanding design's repertoire, the more that social problems expand is a very nice kind of coda for the book. Mariana, I mean, you're somebody who's been an advocate for this way of thinking. What's your take on the book, and how does it relate to your own work?
Well, I was really, it was terrific to encounter this book when Christian put it out there. I've had the opportunity to look closely at the work Christian was doing early days when I was doing my doctoral work, so more than 10 years ago. And for me at the time, I was exploring what continues to be my sort of academic inquiry and obsession, which is how do we look at questions of value and measurement of impact and accountability for design in the social space. And I think this book does a very important bridging, I would say, between our professions in design, but also management and other professions, and makes it quite accessible to say we have come a long way. We have a set of tools and gains, and there's a lot of examples in the book that make it very accessible. But we have to also recognize our limitations, and we have to go beyond, and we have to really understand this new normal that we're living in a finite planet. So the questions and the framing of the book are very closely related to some of my own research, where I'm, taking the stance that design thinking, yes, has brought us a lot of innovation in product and services. We've seen an uptick of design thinking in the last 20 years or so, but we have to recognize that as designers and design thinkers, we're doing much more, right? And when it comes to issues of complexity, as all of the issues that social innovation has to touch, design thinking as a toolkit is very limited, right? So we have to go beyond.
I think that's a very good moment to bring in our first poll. Joe, if you could put up our first poll. So I'd like all our participants on this webinar. The question is, how confident are you that design has the capacity to address expanding societal challenges, things like environmental degradation, social inequality, and so on? So you've got 4 options. So if everybody could vote, that would be great, and we'll get the results up in a moment. So if everyone just one vote, are you very fairly confident, not very confident, not confident at all? Just gauge just the feeling in the room as to whether design as a community, as a discipline, or a set of disciplines, and we'll get more into the different theories and toolboxes that we need. Just while we're waiting for the result, Christian, I mean, you're quite. There are 2 things that really struck me in the kind of messaging of the book. One was you were very resistant to what you call the Californian ideology. You really stuck it to the Silicon Valley tech giants in terms of technological determinism and quite a narrow view of innovation. And you also you're a little more gentle around design thinking, but you think that it's definitely got its limitations. Do you think that design thinking is linked in some way to, IDEO and Stanford, very, very close to Silicon Valley? Do you think the 2 things have got entwined a bit?
Yeah, I think you have a point there, and maybe we don't make it so precisely as you do right now in the book, but in a way you can say that the success of design thinking has definitely gone hand in hand with, you could say, the Californian ideology, with, creativity in a bottle, with extremely diligent focus on user experience, and dare I say it, even manipulation. And so just as an example, I think maybe we mentioned in the book, but who's the biggest competitor for Netflix, or used to be the biggest competitor for Netflix, and that was really your sleep. And so leveraging design thinking and the ethnographic and the methodological toolkit for the purpose of growth and scale and market dominance, it's been very, very powerful, but has it been good?
Yeah.
And so that's part of the story. Now, I think the success of design thinking is, as Mariana also alluded to, is that we've in a way democratized design to many other professions and disciplines, made it even legible and to some extent understandable, even though we all know that a 5-step or 3-dimension process, whatever, is really not a true reflection of deep and craft-based design work. But it's an attempt to describe something, right? And then you can tap into. So I think we're trying to be balanced in the view, but I would say that if you ask questions about the future of our planet and of our species, then you cannot ignore the fact that we have been moving down probably the wrong path for quite a while, including the last 20 years, and that now we need to take a more expansive view, a more holistic view, culturally, ethnically, historically, and that we have to be very critical of what future are we being invited into from Silicon Valley.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Joe, can we have the results? Okay, so that's very confident and fairly confident. Really, 90% of you are pretty confident. That's quite a resounding vote of confidence in design.
Wow.
Mariana, are you surprised at that, or relieved, or?
I'm pleased to see it. I'm not surprised because I hang out with a lot of you, and I would say that we're all, quite optimistic, and we have to be, right? Ezio Manzini likes to say that, you have to be this eternal optimist if you are in our fields. So knowing a bit of the audience that is joining us today, the results don't surprise me. And I think it is important, right, to have this confidence, to believe in this field. We have an expertise and what I call, through this concept of design attitude that we've been working on at Case Western, where I've studied for a very long time. This idea that design really brings a mindset that allows us to confront, I think, a set of questions which are explored in the Expand book that are much more complex than questions that can be simply addressed through rapid prototyping and through some of the techniques that we have come to really master through design thinking. And, the research shows that the verdict is mixed when you're looking at rigorous quantitative research of the outcomes in terms of putting forth innovation beyond some studies that look at product innovation. The design thinking results are mixed. So we have to be optimistic because we have to go beyond with these mindsets and really understanding this opportunity we have as a field to collaborate with other fields and introduce, I think, a broader way of looking at these issues.
Thank you. We're getting some nice comments in and some interesting provocative questions, and we'll get to those. I just want to pick up on something Philip Johnson said. I guess the degree of confidence has to be around the certainty that those implementing solutions actually understand the contribution design can make and how it should be implemented. I think that's how, we can be confident in ourselves as a design community, but it's the clients that really matter, which I think is worth pointing out. Let's dive a little deeper into the themes of Expand. Christian, tell us a little bit about. You don't just kind of diagnose the problem. You come up with 6 potential expansions of the design discipline. Do you want to talk us through those? And
Sure. Yeah, let me just give a very, very brief overview, and then of course you will have to read or listen to the book to get the details. But we suggest just tentatively 6 ways to broaden our thinking, and in a way we kind of jokingly say put the thinking into design thinking, but to broaden our thinking about innovation to address these expanding problems. The first one is time, which asks questions about what time horizon are we designing for. And in a commercial world, it's often quite narrow and short time horizons in terms of market pace and products and so on. In a government setting, it's typically election cycles that determine the time horizon. However, because we know that the challenges we're facing globally are systemic, they're long-term, they are mostly wicked, they're much longer term challenges. So how do we expand our thinking and our practices to go to much longer time horizons, drawing on foresight, drawing on scenarios, speculative design, design fiction, and so on. So that's number one. The second one is we call proximity. Proximity is maybe a different word for empathy, but it's about closeness and the feeling of closeness to someone or something that can drive ethical action. That means we have to question in design, who do we design for, or what do we design for? And we are challenging, as many others like us, the notion of only human-centered design, and asking, are there other life forms we may want to care about as well in the face of climate change, environmental degradation, biodiversity crises, for example. But proximity is also about how can you reuse the skills and discipline in design to really generate a feeling of closeness, to galvanize action among those that need to implement design. Thirdly, life. Life is a big question, right? We live longer. We have an aging society, at least in the developed world, also increasingly in the developing world. We have questions about what is living and what is non-living that are being questioned in a digital world. Artificial intelligence by now can be so human-like that it's hard to tell the difference. And we also have people who are now building startups where you can upload your digital self to the digital afterlife. So life is changing and morphing and expanding in new and very difficult and strange ways that we need to cope with and design with. Then we have value, as you mentioned, Mariana. The question is, what value do we actually want to generate? And if we talk about the Silicon Valley myth and the Silicon Valley business model, it's mostly about money and scale and market share and so on. And that goes for many designers who've been, that's what their clients go for. But how do we, and this is not a new question, it's goes way back to the late 60s and early 70s, at least in our discipline here, right? But, how do we design for social value? How do we design for environmental value? How do we design for governance, for democratic, inclusive value? How do we broaden our perspective on the value creation and do that from the very, very early understanding of problem spaces? And then we have a tough one called dimensions. It's the fifth expansion. Dimensions is about digital and physical, and how they are morphing in different ways, and how humans can collaborate with artificial intelligence, both in the, you could say, operations side, but also in the creative side. But dimensions is also about scales that we design for, and from nanoscale to planetary scale. Why does the Danish architect Bjarke Ingels and his company Big Architects go to design for Mars, partnership amongst others with the Arab Emirates and with Elon Musk? Well, maybe it's not so much to bring the civilization to Mars, but maybe it's to learn something about how to design in extreme environments on our planet. But that's dimensions. And then finally, we have a chapter called sectors, a point called sectors, which is about the morphing and not expansion as much maybe as implosion of the private, the public, the civic, and even academic sectors around new questions around how do we work together as humanity to create impact and value for society, and being surprised that the private sector is taking on social change, environmental change in a bigger way now, ESG, and governments are acting in innovative, ambitious, visionary ways that we haven't seen 10, 15 years ago. So somehow the sectors are blurring and maybe even morphing together. Those are the 6 expansions.
Yeah, I think they're very interesting because they're at different scales and they're facing in different directions. You've got time, proximity, life, value, dimensions, and sectors. If I look at my own career, as the co-founder of the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Design, some are more familiar. Proximity, the case for hyper-local, place-based interventions. We did a lot of that, but you're kind of pushing it to the next level. But I think there's a nice piece in the book where you say universal and inclusive design have helped us understand the physical world. Now we need a new understanding of the immaterial world. I think these are the new dimensions that we're moving into. I want to ask you, Mariana, which of these expansions relate most to you? Where did you find the common ground?
Well, I really, both as an educator at Parsons, reflecting on the work we do with our students and in our programs, and as a researcher, looking very globally. I had the opportunity to collaborate on the last book that Christian has been a wonderful contributor to, Design for Social Innovation, this survey of case studies from around the world, where a lot of these dimensions, the 6 expand dimensions, are coming up through 45 case studies and very plural practices that are happening not only in the global north, right, but also in the global south. And I would say that 2 chapters for me really resonated in this book. The one around value, because again, as an educator, it's our perspective at Parsons that we have such an important role, not only to teach, but to learn from this next generation of designers that are coming from around the world with very strong views about how they want to contribute with their creativity, through making, through strategy, for a world and a planet that is finite. So the discussion in this book around circular economy principles and climate emergency, of course, resonated, but so did the big questions we're confronting if we think about what does it mean to design for a net zero society? How do we think about intellectual property issues when we are also creating and will continue to create and contribute to the material world, because we know how to do that as designers. And the chapter on sectors really resonated as well, because I've been working in the field of design for social innovation and international development, where we have seen a move to understand that the opportunity for innovation, often for designers, is in some of the gaps that occur where things that governments or industry cannot really pick up. And we can really be facilitators, mediators, bridge these sectors. And we know that innovation happens, right, at the crossroads. And increasingly, I would say, the complexity we're facing requires what Christian talks about, Mariana Mazzucato's work around the mission economy, and this idea that these silos don't stand anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So value and sectors for me.
Value and sectors really for you, really interesting. I'm going to go to our second poll. Joe, could you put up the second poll? And I'm really going to ask our participants how well equipped are designers to contribute to expanding societal challenges? And you've got 4 options again: very well equipped, moderately well equipped, lacking relevant theory and tools, a totally new approach needed. I'm interested if you could just a single choice, if you could vote. And while we're waiting for the results, I just want to go to our rapidly expanding Q&A, and I'm not going to take them in order, but I want to Alex Burdett said, when innovating and transforming existing systems, in your experience, what should stay the same and what needs to change? Christian, do you want to? Is there a generic answer to that, or is it project specific?
That's a really good one. That's a really good question. I don't know if you're familiar with the 3 Horizons framework on systems change, but it's something we're using, and I think it's relevant in this context, which is that when we're working and designing for systems change, some things need to go away, some things need to stay, and new things need to emerge. And probably in design, we are better at the new things that need to emerge. And we are very good, I think, also using speculative approaches to suggest, make prompts, prototypes, visualizations. And by the way, I very much agree, also 2D and 3D suggestions that illustrates what a new system might look like, might feel like, might work like. So I think the answer is that there will always be something that has to go away. There will always be something that remains, and always be something new that we need. The mix of those things and the pace by which we can make those shifts, that's the really, really big challenge, right? And that's, I think, where this unique facilitating role for designers and design-minded actors to be those, as some say, transition brokers that can help broker the transitions that are needed. And in many ways, I think personally that the word transition, social, environmental, economic, and so forth, is maybe, or technological, is maybe more the word we're searching for now than even the word innovation.
Right. Joe, can we have the results of poll 2? And I'll let our distinguished guests. Okay, so much more down the middle here. Nearly half of you think lacking relevant theory and tools. Only 6% think we're very well equipped. A third of you think we're moderately well equipped. Mariana, what do you extract from that result as an educator of the next generation?
I'm glad to see the honesty of these polls. I think that they confirm, what our discussions are with our colleagues, certainly my colleagues at Parsons and our students. And when we think about curriculum development in our institutions, I think we're very clear-eyed about the tensions, right, that we have in terms of what do we fit in versus what we can't fit in bounded programs, especially at the graduate level. But it resonates, right? We are seeing that the complexity of the space does demand capabilities that are often not in a lot of programs, right? They demand an understanding of analysis that is both qualitative and quantitative. They demand an understanding of complexity theory, of community organizing, and many other fields in the social sciences that have been at this for a very long time. And, the question becomes, as an educator, how do you balance it at all in a way that is rigorous enough and doesn't take away from the design education chops that are still very, very important. A lot of my research shows that the opportunity to bring, and I'm sure this resonates with the audience, right, that to bring these complex ideas into a very accessible way of understanding them is a bit of the magic that also happens, and we don't have to forget about it as well.
Christian, what's your response to that result? It seems to me that people are confident that design can rise to the challenge, but there needs to be a new skill set.
No, yeah, in a way, that's why we wrote the book, because I think this goes to the point that we see these turbulent, complex, accelerating challenges that we are all of us struggling with. It's not one single country or one single it's very global in scale, of course, with different ways it plays out. And we then see a field of discipline that's in many ways quite self-confident, because we know this discipline, these practices, these ways of thinking can create, can involve, can engage, can mobilize through empathy, we know we have something, as you say, Mariana, that to others sometimes might feel even magical. However, we are also, and this is, I think, the beauty of it, we are also humble. Because one thing is being ambitious about the potentiality of a discipline, of a field. The other one is humility to say, we also need to rise to the challenge. We also need to open up for other disciplines. We need to learn new approaches. We need to add new layers on theory, thinking, and so on. To give you an example from Denmark, we as a national actor for design often do data and surveys to see what's the state of play. And in Denmark, 85% of companies right now, businesses all over the country, are working on circular economy, on sort of that new value creating model that's about reusing, upcycling, and regenerating physical resources for the green economy. But less than half of them see they have the competencies to do so. And the competencies they lack, by the way, are, mapping value creating systems, and supply chains, it's user engagement, it's actually prototyping, experimentation, it's new material understanding. It's a lot of design disciplines that they're lacking, they can't get access to. So it kind of reflects the survey from right now that we know we should do it. We are working on these challenges, but we don't necessarily see that we have the skills. And if we are to be relevant as a discipline for companies, for the public sector, we have to hurry to up the game, as I think the survey reflects. And it's not only about the 6 items that we are suggesting, but I think it's about a wide range of those disciplines that are needed to address these types of challenges.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I'm gonna jump to our Q&A because there's a question here from Cynthia Lawson Jaramillo, who says, what are your thoughts on who gets to design? Must design thinking solutions continue to rely on expert designers who arrive into communities to offer solutions, or do you see more radically inclusive approaches to social impact? That's an expansion all of its own. Mariana, do you want to pick up on that?
Sure. So Cynthia is a dear colleague and the Dean at the School of Design Strategies at Parsons and has an important practice within the indigenous community. So thank you, Cynthia, for that provocation and that question. Absolutely, we are grappling, I think, in our curriculum at Parsons, we're grappling with this question. The book we did on design for social innovation and these case studies around the world, one of the roundtable discussions in that book is titled Geographies, and a chapter, Geographies of Power, right? And we're really looking at it through the lens of people like Ahmed Ansari at NYU, Fatou Wari at Harvard, and my colleague Shana Agid at Parsons, who leads our communication division school, and really sort of putting out there this question of these flows, these directional flows of knowledge that are coming from very different cultures and practices. And how do they need to be accounted for when we're thinking about social impact, right? And the answer is that sometimes, and I've seen it through the work we've done in South America with Art Center and Design Matters, sometimes it's about working with a community organization and community members and deciding that there is no intervention, right? That the work, the elements are there, and you're simply facilitating, amplifying, working in a very humble way, as Christian is saying, to lift things up. I do believe that the expertise of design, the expertise we impart in our consultancies and in our organizations and in our schools matters, and that it's this very interesting sort of relationship, but the awareness about what constitutes expertise and the power dynamics around expertise are really being questioned, revised, and reviewed, and need to be done, especially if we want to be relevant in situations of great complexity and around the world, where some of the canons, I think, of the Western white supremacy culture that a lot of the canons of design still have are being questioned.
I think that was a good full answer to a provocative question. I've got one for you, Christian, because there's a wonderful, in the book, you quote Francis Fukuyama about getting to Denmark, and you say that Denmark itself, you know, always wins the polls for the happiest place on earth, and you know, Copenhagen hasn't got horrible skyscrapers all over it, and people ride bikes and are healthy, and you say, well, it was designed that way. And there's a question here from George Christoph Bircht, who says, Christian, how does your approach in the book translate into design practice in Denmark? What impact can an institution like the Danish Design Centre make?
Yeah, so we have to find out about the impact. We just were awarded a new research project by the government to look at together with the Royal Academy of Design, to look at the history of design policy and of DDC as an institution and what impact it's made. So I don't know yet, but we'll find out. But I do think that the question of building design infrastructure for society is kind of interesting. That, you know, if you choose to look at society as something that can be designed, and you know, we're paraphrasing Francis Fukuyama, the American scholar and professor, famous for writing The End of History. He also wrote a chapter on called Getting to Denmark, which is really about that anybody can get to a place that is thriving, that is pretty happy, that is environmentally reasonably balanced, and that is you know, also has so far at least economic growth. We can discuss that concept, of course, as well. But I think that the question really is about, should you build institutions that can facilitate the conscious, explicit, meaningful design for society? In a way, like Parsons is an institution that plays that role, that RCA and Helen Hamlyn Centre is an institution that plays that role. Should we invest in that kind of infrastructure? Should we nourish it, underpin it, and so on? And I think in many ways the answer is yes. It's something that sometimes is intangible. It's like, why do we pay for this? Or do we need to it's taxpayer funded, or it's, you know, it's we don't have to have it, but having it can lead to something that's pretty profound. And I do think that if I track, this is not research based, but if I do look at the history of the Danish Design Centre, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we were all about physical products and commercialization and growth. That's still something that's there. But the shift towards design management, then design for social innovation, now design for planetary and climate issues, it's a huge shift that reflects the shift in society, but also the role and the power of design. It's a very interesting. We're at a key moment, I think, and you know, traditional organisations like the Danish Design Centre. I remember going to the boiler house at the V&A and seeing the Danish Design Centre under Jens Bernsen in 40 years ago, with a project called The Problem Comes First. The problems at the time were all commercial, right? Sell more Lego, you know, sell more lights. We still do. We still are Lego still.
But it leads me to our third poll. Joe, could we have the third poll? This is I want to ask our participants, which is the most pressing societal challenge that design should address? I mean, we could fill the page. We've put in 6. If you could choose one, that would be absolutely great. And just while we're waiting for the results, I just want to pick up on something that Nico McDonald said on poll 2 and designers lacking relevant theory and tools. We don't read enough beyond what we already agree with, and we've created a filter bubble of left, green, and illiberal thought. Where in the design profession or the design academy was there an informed and serious debate about the issue of climate change, let alone design's role in addressing this? From an American perspective, Mariana, has the design academy grabbed climate and had a serious debate about it?
I think absolutely we're seeing it happen in our architecture schools and, you know, in programs that are looking at the urban theory and environmental questions. We're seeing it happen in a more strategic design perspective. And we're seeing it happen, at least at the New School, it's really happening in close collaboration with non-designers, right? So folks that are really coming from the science perspective and can bring those frameworks and that knowledge into the conversation. It's unquestionable that it is one of the issues that will face us all, no matter what discipline. And I expect that, you know, we are going to be, also we are seeing fields like biodesign, for example, that is very, very prominent in the United States, really, but I see it also in the work I track at Aalto University, where I serve on the board. There is such interesting connections, right? When you look at new materials, coming to also, you know, that are going to have a new impact on how we think about things like the fashion industry, how we're thinking about furniture, environments in our homes, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, it's a conversation, and the academy is embracing it, and there's a lot of work ahead.
Great, thank you. Joe, can we have the results of poll 3? Okay, I had my money on the climate emergency. The social equality is up there as well. Pandemic is right down. Christian, I'm going to put you on the spot. Let's take climate emergency. Which of your expansions would be most relevant in terms of practical solutions?
Well, it's been mentioned, I think, in the conversation going on here, that the notion of expanding simply from human-centered to life-centered design as an entire philosophical stance, I think is of course fundamental. So, you know, who's the user? Who are we designing for? What are we designing for? I had an experience. I was on the jury of the Danish National Awards for Public Innovation, and there was a hospital submission. And normally when hospitals submit for an innovation award, and I should say that, you know, many in Denmark have embraced human-centered design, also in the healthcare system, you expect something with patients. But this hospital had achieved a certification on climate impacts and on circular economy approaches to recycling and reusing plastic waste. And this was a couple of years ago, and I was thinking, something's going on. When hospitals go for an innovation award and it's not on patient, on care, but actually it's on climate, then there's something really, really profound. So I think that's a fundamental shift. And then, of course, the entire book is really set up in a way to say that we need to expand our profession in many directions: time, scale, understanding systems and networks, the proximity to the problem, which includes, you know, watching the icebergs melt, not on television, but in person, and so on. So, but I think that shifting to a life approach is key.
Very interesting. And I'm diving into the Q&A, and I just want to credit Jenny Fernanda Stuyvesant, who said we need to shift from human-centered design to life-centered design. I think you have something similar in the book, humanity-centered design. So, so we're on the same page there. Paul LeCay said, do you have any thoughts on how we can, as designers, challenge the desire and almost natural approach of industries to lead change through seeking scale and centralization, when we realize it often leads to creating similar issues that led us to the current societal crisis? I mean, I'd love both of you, just your thoughts on that, because that's what businesses and industries do, don't they? And that's what governments advocate. They seek economic growth. They seek scale. They seek centralization, when everything we've been talking about wants to go in the opposite direction. So, Mariana, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, the notion of scale, that concept is such a tricky concept. And when we did this book on design for social innovation with Brian Boyer, Andrew Shea, and Jennifer May, my co-editors, we were looking at collecting case studies that had evidence of implementation and impact, but not necessarily scale. So in that book, we were saying, let's track practices of designers around the world that are very rigorous with how they look at social innovation and the questions that are in Expand. But it's include projects that sometimes were very large, with large budgets, international organizations, or organizations like Christians. And then there are some very small projects that have an important impact in a local community with a very modest budget, but that we felt were showing evidence of a new social equity, perhaps, or some impact that we could track. And I give that example because I think it is part of our job as educators, as designers, as researchers, as design practitioners to push back, right? We are very good at reframing the brief. And this, I think, is an ongoing responsibility to engage with industry and reframe sometimes the problem seeking that needs to happen, and advocate for the right scale correlated to questions of value.
That's interesting. I mean, you alluded, Christian, to the problem of the growth model earlier in our conversation. How do we address it, and which expansion would address it most?
Yeah, I think well, several of them, right? But I think the one about value, the question of value, because when we talk about economic growth, it's because we value that over everything else. And if you look at the tech giants' problems, which are significant and growing by the day, they've all been about scale and centralization and economic value, right? So I think for the future, for the hope we can have, and for the role of design and designers, as I think Mariana also said, expanding and thinking about community as value, relationships as value, care as value, places as value, value for others than humans. In the book, we even quote Olafur Eliasson, the artist, for saying, well, with what right do we cut down a tree and make it into a table? What are the rights of nature? What are the rights of other actors than human actors? So I think that's one big, that can be a counterweight and a balancing with economic growth. The other one that I have a lot of faith in that is emerging as it's a new expansion, maybe, is about other forms of work organization. We're seeing the emergence of more distributed, self-managing, self-leading humanocracies. That's, I think personally, is the next generation of design should turn its attention to, because there's such a longing for meaningful work. There's a longing for independence and freedom and meaningful communities at the workplace, also post-COVID. I know it was not a very big thing on the polling, but I think when we look back, we'll see how our conception of work and meaningful work and relationships have changed pretty profoundly during and after the COVID experience. A lot of people are never going back again to the way they used to work. So I think that's a hope for a more distributed, more networked, and more open collaborative form of working.
I think that's a very, very important thing about meaning in communities, meaning in work, meaning in design. We've only got a few minutes left, and there's lots and lots of questions come up, and they're absolutely fantastic from a lot of very eminent individuals. One thing I would ask you all to do is, if you think, is there a design expansion that's not being covered in this talk? Christian has posited 6 expansions, but put in the chat if you think there's a design expansion that could happen. I want to go to a question from Nina Svanstrom. She said, for the design community and designers to be equipped to expand the future, do you also think this entails organizational restructure of design agencies, consultancies, and architectural companies? I think that's a really interesting question, because in my career, I've often been surprised at the degree of conservatism organizationally within highly creative firms. Do you both have a quick comment on that? And we'll try and pick up on 1 or 2 questions as well.
Well, I think we are seeing it happen, right, in the design consultants and even the major design consultancies, and things we've seen in the last few years of consultancies having embracing a social innovation agenda and having to work differently, because, you know, the model of parachuting in, billing for hours, working for 3 months, and then this very extractive model, I would say, is really counter to some of this work, which has, as Christian explains very well in this book, other timescales, right? So there is a lot of change underway, and I think there's an evolution for some committed agencies from going from projects to programs and repeated clients that are long-term. So also working with public funding and having a different sense of stakeholders.
I agree very much, and as an example, my co-author Jens Martin Skibsted is he's a co-founder of Menu1, which is a strategic hybrid design agency, and they're quite big by now, a few hundred colleagues in a couple of years, global in scale. And their growth model, so to speak, has really been about very distributed, very local, connecting local offices and agencies to the community, but doing it in a very, very different way than we see has been happening with the big consultancies, the big management consultancy, just gobbling up design agencies. So I think they are actually pioneering a very different growth model and scaling model that's distributed and localized in the design agency field, as an example. I think it's going to be exciting days ahead of us, also because one thing is the agency structure and which has been very consolidated. How's that changing? But also how clients and large organizations are beginning to rethink or redesign how they organize. I think that's a whole new opportunity for designers.
Thank you, Christian. You'll be glad to know that there has been a suggestion of another expansion from Pablo Colomina. Says designing for future humanities, future civilizations with different ways of being human. That's a very interesting thing. I mean, I think that possibly relates to the life dimension, in that we've got a kind of new relationship between life and death and digital and biological, but that's an expansion. I think it's been a mind-blowing conversation. We started with a very big topic, but then the book deals with a very big topic, and I hope that for all our international participants in this webinar, I hope that you've picked up something out of it. There's great questions that we haven't been able to get to. A number of things, Christian, people are asking about curriculum in schools. Does Denmark teach design thinking? Should it teach design thinking? If not design thinking, what other aspects of design? I think there's a lot there for practitioners to ponder on, for researchers to ponder on, and for educators to think about in terms of forming the future curriculum. Can I say a huge thank you to our two esteemed international guest speakers, Christian Bason and Mariana Amatullo. Thank you all for joining us today. Look out for other in-session Royal College of Art talks, and also the executive education programs. It remains for me to wish you all well. Keep thinking about the future of design. How can we expand what we do? We know it's important, but the challenges are expanding. Let's get thinking about a new design future. Thank you all very much indeed for tuning in.
Wow.
Yay.
Thank you to everyone who has joined us for today's in-session. Jeremy, Christian, Mariana, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your insights and expertise. If you have any additional questions, or if you would like to connect with the executive education team and the speakers, please do reach out directly with us using the contact information. And make sure to tune in to our next in-session talk on the 25th of January, What is Intelligent Mobility, with Jayu Wu, Martin Nularik, and Enrique Shah. And find more information on how to register to this event on the in-session talk page. Thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.
Yeah.